just would like to highlight, if you look on the screen behind me, you can see our logo, and below it says improving human and planetary health. That's a purpose that we have defined for our company. And that's kind of not like just a corporate responsibility thing that we have kind of in a corner of the organization. It's kind of embedded in every employee, in every part of the organization. Basically, it means that all the products that we sell should improve the health of people, and the way we produce them should take good care of our planet. And I'm going to touch into that a little bit later in my presentation too. Okay. Let me start a little bit with the big picture, because of the Krill Resource, which is a very interesting research and a very different resource. So krill is actually the biggest biomass on our planet. It's twice the size of the human biomass. It's everywhere. It's in all the oceans, covering 70% of our planet's surface. And then it sits in the bottom of the food chain, and we know that all the important nutrient and molecules, they accumulate up through that food chain. So if you kind of think big about it, you can think that, you know, through the size, where it is, and where it sits in the food chain, that through millions of years of evolution, krill and the nutrients and molecules in krill has become important for all life on the planet. And that's basically was the starting point for Aker BioMarine when we started 15 years ago. Here's an untapped resource that can be harvested in a sustainable way that could be important for people and for animals. And through those 15 years, what we have done is that we have developed technology to harvest it in a sustainable way. We have innovated processes so we can refine out those molecules that are potentially important for life. We have done quite massive R&D to understand how those molecules impact life. And then we have commercialized what we have found so far. And during those 15 years, we have built up that robust and unbeatable scale in the supply chain that we just talked about. I mean, we have a cost advantage compared to our peers, which is significant. We have developed deep understanding and knowledge about the biology and the chemistry of those molecules and that biomass that has resulted in those 76 patent families and quite a big and actionable innovation pipeline that we'll touch into in the presentation here today. And through those years also, we have developed a quite robust and predictable business too. I mean, as you can see here on our kind of spread on customers, we have 42% of our business in North America, but 23% now comes from Asia. And we have a good foothold in Asia, and we're growing very rapidly in the Asian markets for all our products. And if you look at the product split, you will see that 37% of our revenue comes from the high margin business of Superba, which is in that omega-3 segment that you know about. 27% comes from our aquaculture ingredient business, and now 32% comes from our consumer brand business that I'll talk more about in my presentation. And we have grown quite substantially the last years, and especially the last couple of years. As you can see, I mean, in 2019, we were $246 million in revenue, growing very rapidly the last couple of years. But you can also see here, just looking at Q1 20 versus Q1 19, that growth is accelerating on the back of investments that we have done both on capacity and in market development. And then looking at the EBITDA numbers, you'll see that we have a business model where we have 65 to 70% fixed cost, so that when we have kind of covered all those fixed costs by our revenues, that incremental growth is very profitable. And that's why you can see here that the EBITDA growth is much steeper than the revenue growth. And the same here, accelerating now into 2020.
So hang on, could you perhaps deconstruct that for me a little bit? So having looked at sort of 2017 to 2018, we've got a 21 million incremental contribution on EBITDA versus 30 million of revenue, 67% incremental margin. And then last year, 2019, we see 100 million plus in revenue and incremental revenue of only 14. What's driving sort of the incremental margin 2017, 2018?
Yeah, so there's several things, but and Katrine, the CFO, will talk a little bit about it later. But just to kind of very briefly now, the way we are doing our accounting is that when we are catching the krill, producing the raw material, we are allocating all the cost to the inventory of that, and then that cost is actually rolled out, and you get the margin when you sell the product later. And that's why you have some delay in actually when you see the margins versus when you see the uplift on revenue. But Katrine will touch into that a little bit later in the section we have at the back.
Mm-hmm. And will we also be spending a little bit of time on how the commodity is actually priced in the first place? Given it's free because you're getting it out of the ocean.
Yeah. We're going to touch on both pricing in the markets and our cost of goods, and you can see kind of that development, which is a key driver for our improved EBITDA going forward. Okay, moving on. One of the strengths of Aker BioMarine is that we are fully vertical integrated, which means that we do every step from harvesting in Antarctica all the way out now with consumer brands on the shelf of Walmart. And that brings a couple of benefits for our company. One is that we don't have any leakage of margins to any third parties along the value chain. We are not depending on those third parties. We do everything ourselves. But maybe more important, it gives us speed and flexibility when it comes to innovation and development. So when we have a new product or a new feature, we can quickly roll that out to the market. And when we see that there's a need from the consumers, we can quickly adopt backwards in the value chain. And that gives us that kind of big flexibility, allowing us to have fast and relevant innovations in the market space. And I'm going to try to now take you through kind of step by step each of these steps in our value chain. It starts with harvesting. We touch into that. 69% of all the catch in the world done with our 3 vessels, 13 vessels sharing the rest. That gives us a tremendous cost leadership when it comes to what the cost is per produced product. Then the second step is that we have a factory on board our vessel. We produce the product on board our vessel. For all the product that goes into aquaculture and the pet segment, we package, we label it, we finish it on board the vessels, and then our transport boat comes and picks it up. That helps actually take down the CO2 footprint significantly because we reduce the volume and the weight we have to move around. The third part is that we have quite a big R&D department. We spend a substantial amount of our revenues into R&D every year. And we have 15 people with PhD only in our headquarters here in Oslo. And we have a policy where we are publishing everything that we are studying so that others can build on our science. But what's important to say about that is that we are also patenting everything that we find that is patentable as part of that process. And so far we have 60 published studies that are published in independent peer-reviewed journals that documents the benefit that the ingredients from krill has both on fish, animals and humans. Then for our omega-3 products, we make them in our biorefinery in Houston, Texas. And here the importance of scale is even bigger because here about 90% of the cost is fixed. So it's all about driving volume through that infrastructure to get the unit cost down. So today, 80% of all the omega-3 from krill in the world is being produced in our factory in Houston, which again gives us a big advantage when it comes to unit cost of that krill oil omega-3 product. And then we are I would say, specialized ingredient company. So a lot of ingredient company, they use distributors around the world to handle sales and marketing. We have IP protected ingredients that have special science. Very often we do science together with customers. So that means that we are teaming up long term with customers, developing the market with them. And because of that, we have sales and marketing offices in all the key markets that we operate. So that means in Australia, in China, India, Thailand, all the key markets we operate, we have our own people that are working very, very close with the customers there to develop that market together. And I think that's an important factor to krill, is that there is no kind of like a commodity market that you have in salmon, for instance, where you just kind of produce it and there's someone to take it. You have to develop that market yourself. And that's why this vertical integrated value chain is so important. And the last step that we have added in now is our own brands that we are now rolling out as we speak. So our new omega-3 brand for the US market is now on the shelf in Target, in CVS, in Walmart. And by autumn, it will also be on the shelves in all the other major retail chains in the US, giving us that possibility to drive our innovation out and, of course, capture much more of the margin coming out of it. Okay, so you can look at Aker BioMarine basically as two businesses. It is the ingredient company Aker BioMarine, which are developing ingredients from krill for aquaculture, omega-3 human market, and the pet segment. And then we have our brand business that consists of two companies, Lang Pharma Nutrition and Epion. And I'm going to take you through all of them with some more details. And I'm going to go a little bit brief here, since you have some knowledge of the omega-3 market in the world, but 54% of our revenues on the ingredient side comes from our omega-3 sales. But we only use 10% of our raw material, so this is a high margin business for us. And we have, through several studies, documented how omega-3 from krill is different from that omega-3 coming from fish oil or from algae that you are familiar from DSM. And I'm going to try to explain you that very briefly, what is different. But basically, all the cells in our bodies, they have a membrane of something called phospholipids. And for an omega-3 to come into the cells and into the organs to have an effect, it must be in that phospholipid form. So if you take a fish oil or you eat fish, that omega-3 will go to your liver will repack it into phospholipid form and send it into your cells so you can have a function. In krill, that omega-3 comes by nature in that phospholipid form, so it goes straight into the blood and out to the cells and organs. And through several, peer-reviewed and independent studies, we have shown that the result of that is that twice the amount of omega-3 ends up in the cells compared to what you get with traditional omega-3s from fish oil. We have also done comparison, you can see on the bottom side here, that actually taking a krill oil supplement every day gives you the same amount of omega-3 in your cells and organs as eating fish for dinner 3 times a week, which is what most governments are recommending their population to do, and which is very hard for most people to do. So we can address that directly. So that's a fast-growing segment for us, where we're growing double digits, and we've been doing that for many, many years because of that science that's backing the product. On the aquaculture side, we have 44% of our ingredient revenues coming from there, but it's a lower margin business. We are positioned in 3 ways, targeting marine fish in the Mediterranean, salmon, and shrimp. And to look at those 3 positioning we have, the first one is that by biology, for instance, a salmon, they have appetite on the nutrients that their body needs. So when you add some of our ingredient into the feed of a salmon, its appetite will increase, it will eat more, and it will grow faster. And we have several studies documenting this, ranging from 10 to 30% extra growth, depending on where in the life cycle of the salmon you use the ingredient. This is the main reason why so many salmon farmers in Norway are using krill in the diet, because you have a high salmon price, and it's good business to get more biomass out of the infrastructure.
Does that make any difference to the omega-3 content of the fish itself?
Yeah, typically they try to balance that. So when they add in our product, they will take out fish meal or fish oil or soy on the protein side. So they try to keep the omega-3 levels in the diet at the same level. But what we have documented in some later studies is similar like we see in humans. More of that omega-3 actually ends up in the tissue of the salmon rather than in the around the or in the fat in their belly, which means that actually you get higher content of omega-3 in the salmon fillet, basically.
For any given input, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. The second position that we have worked with a big R&D program is how these phospholipids omega-3s and some of the other components like choline that you have in krill are improving the health of salmon and shrimp. And we have documented through several studies that the immune system is boosted, mortality goes down, and you can keep high performance in your farm even if you have disease going around, which is a big problem in a lot of these areas. So it kind of helps productivity in a disease state of the farm. And the last one, which is kind of the latest studies we've been working on, is that due to kind of the stressful situation, especially for a salmon, and because of their diet not being natural, you're getting a lot of inflammation in the muscle of the salmon that impacts the quality of the meat. And we have documented now that we're getting less of these black spots. We have less of this gaping, it's called, which makes it hard to kind of slice it up. And you get better quality in the meat by feeding them salmon. And we have some farmers in Norway starting to position a premium salmon based on feed made out of krill. So that's a 3 position we have in aquaculture. The third segment we are in is in pet, and that's very similar to the human side. These, dogs, which is what we are focusing on, also need omega-3 in their diet. And then we have also documented here that the best source of that omega-3 is from krill. And we have also documented that that takes down the risk for some of those health issues typically older dogs will get. So you can get a healthier dog that can live longer. Okay, I'm going to take you into the brand business now, starting with Lang Pharma Nutrition. So that's a company we bought in beginning of 2019. We bought them to get the infrastructure and backbone to launch big brands in the mass market in the US. We figured out that we can hire kind of expertise with branding, marketing, and these aspects. But when it comes to the system integration and the deep relationship with the retailers, you need to actually run the logistic and distribution. We saw that was very hard to build organically. That's why we bought Lang. And Lang is a specialist that are developing private label for the big retailers in dietary supplements. So for instance, when Walmart want their own krill oil product under the Walmart brand, they will go to Lang, and then Lang will develop that for them. And Lang is solely focused on the top 7 retailers in the US. So they only work with the biggest retailers that together have 85% of all the retail sales in the US. So that's a kind of stepping stone for us to be able to come with own brand, but it's also a very interesting business on a standalone basis. They're focusing on specialty ingredients that are patented and have some special science to it, so they can get high margins. And they're experiencing quite nice growth because it's a strategy for most retailers to expand the private label business as an answer to competition from Amazon. So Lang being...
So how much of Lang would be krill oil currently?
So they were one of our biggest customers when we bought them. So they had about 30% of their business was krill oil products for private label of those retailers.
Thanks, yeah.
So quite nice growth, average 9% per year, but that's also accelerating now, especially after they kind of finished. They were in a sales process quite a long time. So finishing that, they can focus on the business, and we see quite nice uptick on the business now with almost 90% growth, first quarter 20 versus first quarter 19. So with that kind of business, we could go and we could launch our own brand. That's organized under a company that we call Epion, and they are launching this omega-3 brand called Kori. And Kori, it's kind of designed. We have hired a team with people from classical, fast-moving consumer goods companies, kind of talents from Nestle and these type of companies that are trying to make the dietary supplement industry more consumer friendly. And you can see the result of that on the graphics, very visual. And you can also see on the top here, you see that claim of doctor recommended. This will actually be the first omega-3 product in the US market that will have that doctor recommended stamp. That means that more than 700 doctors independently have recommended people to take the product. And we're rolling that, as I mentioned earlier, this brand is now available in CVS, Walmart, and Targets in all their stores. And we have also commitment from the rest of the big retailers like Costco, Sam's Club, Walgreens. They will launch it after the summer. And that's quite unique that these retailers actually commit to launching the product year one. Typically, like Walmart, they would like to see how it's performing in CVS before they choose to take it on. But they have actually trusted us and kind of fell in love with the program and have committed already 3 slots, product slots, already everybody the first year. And one is that they like our consumer-friendly approach, but I think the most important is our model. And that comes back to the value of being vertically integrated. In Aker BioMarine, we make our money further down in the value chain. We make money when we sell krill oil ingredient to our own brand, which means that we can actually invest all the gross margins from our own branded company, Epion, into marketing, because we're making the money further down the value chain, which means we can outspend everybody else in the market when it comes to marketing. And then also when we're the leader in the krill omega-3 space in the US, there's like 100 brands of krill omega-3 in the US today, most of them supplied by us. So when we invest in marketing and you have a spillover effect to those other brands, we will also benefit from that by the ingredient sale we do to them. So that's quite substantial marketing. So in 2020, That means that we will spend $20 million in marketing, and within the next 3-4 years, that's going to grow to $40 million in marketing every year. That's more than anybody else is doing in the health and wellness sector. And also just with the listing we have right now, the first full year, which is next year, this will be the 25th largest health and wellness brand in the US market. Okay, I'm gonna take you through some of the investment highlights of our company.
Just before we move off from there, any suggestion that Epion might be launched in other markets, or are you literally just going to concentrate on building up your position in the US market over the next 3 to 4 years?
Yeah, so right now the plan is US only. And the reason of that is that that's where it's big enough to have scale. I mean, if you look at Europe, it's so fragmented. I mean, it will be different in France, in Germany, all the countries are different. So it's only in the US where you have kind of enough scale to really push it like that.
Okay, thanks, yeah.
Okay, so 6 investment highlights of Aker BioMarine. I'm going to try to take them quickly through them. I'm sure you're familiar with this first one, which is about Aker BioMarine being very well positioned for the challenges and the changes that has to happen in society going forward. You know, 10 million people, 2020, more food, more protein, where it's going to come from. Yeah. And you know, looking at agriculture and see how we have deforestation, you know, the CO2 footprints, we have to look for new sources for food. I'm sure you're familiar with this story from aquaculture. That means two things.
The krill one's new for me.
Yeah, so but I mean, so you will have tremendous growth in aquaculture, and we're going to be part of that growth. But there's also going to be a need for protein sources from other sources directly to humans. And you can see on my screen here, the CO2 footprint per edible protein of krill is very low because it's such an efficient fishery. So it's half of, for instance, in salmon. And I'll touch into a little bit later. We're working on how we're going to launch now a protein product for human consumption. And then the other side of that is very interesting statistics that you can see behind me here. This is the leading causes of death in 2016 compared to what they expect those leading causes of death to be in 2040. And in 2040, there's 4 new diseases on the top 10 list, all of them related to lifestyle, so lifestyle diseases. And we believe that in society and for people, there will be more and more focus on how you can prevent these lifestyle diseases. And that's where we are with our omega-3 product, right in there. So you can say that Aker BioMarine, with our products and our offering, we are right in there to be part of solving those challenges that society will have to address in the years to come.
And putting Novo Nordisk out of business with any luck. Yeah.
Okay, the second investment highlight is that through those 15 years, we have already built up a substantial amount of science and data of the benefits and effects of our product. So on the top side here, this is all our studies for aquaculture. Every year, we do 5 to 10 new studies in aquaculture, documenting the benefits, making the farmers now believing more in the effects and ability to pay more. And Katrine will talk about that. We see a general growth in our pricing year by year because we have more and more data documenting the benefits of using it. And then on the human side, a lot of studies documenting the health benefit and especially then how to prevent those lifestyle diseases. Enough so that we can make claims with our own brand and our customers can make claims in how to market those health benefits to consumers. Third investment highlight is the entry barriers. And we touched on the fishery and how that worked. I mean, this slide you talked about earlier, but as I talked about back then, you have big ticket to enter into this very complex fishery, $220 million. That's what it costs to get in there. Once you believe you can do that, you have to believe you can be more efficient than Aker BioMarine. On the side here, you can see how much each of our vessel is fishing and how much each of the other vessel is fishing. And again, thinking about this is the same size, the same cost structure like ours. So we have just a fraction of the unit cost to make 1 kilo product compared to our competitors. So a new player making that type of investment need to believe that they can come up and compete with us in another way. And I think it's worth mentioning, like the Chinese, which is most active today, they're making food. They're just freezing the krill whole and bringing it to China, and they eat it, just like a small shrimp. Then you have to pass our patent portfolio, we touched about that, and then after that, you have to be better than us in building those relationships that we have built over 15 years with those customers in our local markets. A new player coming in here needs to believe that they can do that better than us. So as a result of all these barriers, the result is that the leadership position of Aker BioMarine in krill is just growing and growing. As there's some new players coming in, there's more kind of going out on the other end. The fourth investment highlight is our clear commitment to sustainability. That was something when we started in 2015, that we had that very clear. We need to be absolutely critical on making sure that we build a sustainable fishery and a sustainable business. And that has evolved all those years. And we were one of the first companies in the world to actually implement United Nations sustainability goals in the core of our strategy, in the core of what type of products we offer and how we operate. And we selected 4 of those sustainability goals from United Nations, the 4 where we have the biggest impact, where we are measuring our impact and where we're implementing new initiative all the time. And the first sustainability goals we're focusing on is on that building, that pioneering, that sustainable fishery. Being the most sustainable fishery in the world, and even our ambition here is that we're going to be a role model for other fisheries around the world. And that's both by being part of making sure that this continues to be a strict regulation. For instance, we have been lobbying and actually got through that all vessels should have independent observers on board a vessel so that you can't cheat with your catch data. So we're actively working with the regulatory body to make sure this continues to be regulated in a very strict way. The second I would like to mention is this eco-harvesting technology that you see on the picture number 2, which is a technology we have developed to eliminate bycatch. That's in our partnership we had with WWF, the environmental group. They said there's lots of krill down there, but there's other species vulnerable. You need to make sure you are not catching anything else than krill. And as I mentioned, we are MSC certified. As you say, that's many different certifications, but that's the highest ranking certification you can get on a product. And then you have the Sustainable Fishery Partnership, which is really not a certification. They are just reviewing the sustainability of different fisheries. And they have given us a rating as the only reduction fishery in the world that actually have that. The second sustainability goal we're focusing on is responsible consumption and production. It's about reducing CO2 footprint and waste footprint. And I would like to mention 2 projects that we're working on. That's picture number 2. That's a sail drone that we have developed, powered by wind and solar power, goes in systematic grids in Antarctica, in the oceans, collecting data about biomass, temperatures, algae, currents, feeding it up into a machine learning model that we have developed to predict where the krill is at any given time. And then our captains are using that to make sure they are positioned at the right spots at the right time, to make sure we don't waste any fuel or CO2 in looking for where the right krill is at any given time. That data that we're generating there is also shared openly with all the environmental NGOs that are interested in the Antarctic region and with the regulatory body, so they can actually go to using real-time data to set the quota rather than just historical data. The second project I would like to mention is this vessel we see in picture number 3. That's the new vessel we took in 2019. It's called Antarctic Endurance. And in that vessel, we have implemented everything that was available of green technology, even technology that hasn't been done in real operation before we tried it out. Gave us some startup problems when we began operating the vessel, but helped us take big steps in reducing CO2. So that vessel has 30% less CO2 footprint than a traditional fishing trawler. Third sustainability goals we focus on is zero hunger, which is about making that aquaculture production more efficient. If you look at our customer base last year and look at that extra growth they got in their farms because of our ingredient, that equaled 325 million extra meals of seafood produced. And that's helping them being more efficient. You can get more salmon, more shrimp of the same infrastructure. The same with our protein development for humans. You can see the CO2 footprint, that we can come with a more sustainable source of proteins for humans than those alternatives that are out there today. And the last one we're focusing on is good health and well-being, which is about combating these lifestyle diseases I talked about earlier. 9,000 studies documenting how omega-3 from krill and other omega-3 sources are reducing the risk of those lifestyle diseases. And there was a very interesting study that came some years ago that I'm sure DSM knows very well about, showing that for every $1 a consumer spends on an omega-3 product, $2.3 is being saved in the healthcare system because the risk of lifestyle disease goes down with these people. And last year there was about 5 million people that were taking a krill oil supplement every day, and the cost savings in the healthcare system of that 5 million group was about $1 billion based on that report. Okay, the fifth investment highlight is that Katrine will soon show you the numbers, but those numbers are based on existing capacities, existing products, and the trends that we already have in our business. But we have this big innovation pipeline of new things that are starting to materialize, but that's not reflected in our financial numbers. And those innovations, they are going on two axes. The x-axis here, it's about new products where you can get a better margin for the product that you have versus what you have in the offering today. And then the other axis, the y-axis, is about new business models where you can get better margin out of it. Good example of that new business model is that Kori omega-3 brand we are launching, allowing us to get a significant better margin. But to put it in perspective, when we sell an ingredient to a brand, it's cost about $130 per kilo. When consumer goes to Walmart to pick it up on the shelf, it costs $1,300 per kilo. So there's a lot of value that's being lost in that value chain, and we want to innovate and be further out in that value chain. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples of this. The first one is this, what I have framed out. That's something called Promi. It's a protein powder ingredient that we've been developing over the last 4 or 5 years to address the fast-growing global protein market in the world. $33 billion of protein powders from mainly whey and soy, and with 7% growth every year. This year, we're starting to build our first factory to produce that protein. It's going to be here in Norway, small pilot plant, 100 tons capacity. And then we're going to be, right after that, start to build a big commercial plant in the US with 5,000 tons capacity. And that protein that we have developed is going to compete with the gold standard today, which is whey protein. And we have documented that the amino acid profile of the protein is superior to what is in whey. And it also has some functional benefits, which is very important for success in the market. Which means that it's water soluble, so you don't have to blend it into milk-based product. You can basically make protein water. And it's heat stable, which allows you to pasteurize the product, so you can actually have long shelf life. That's two key components that you need of a protein, so you get flexibility when you're going to mix it into food products. So we're going to both have a more sustainable and more kind of healthier protein for consumers, and a protein that is easier to work with for those that are making products with protein in it. The second example that I want to mention is on the left side. We're talking about Kori and our omega-3 brand that we're launching in the US right now. We're also now starting to prepare the launch of our own dog food brand in the US. The first really transparent, sustainable dog food brand built around our krill ingredient and all the scientific data we have on it, and a marketing concept that we have developed over the last years. So we have taken basically, and that marketing concept is about taking those long-distance dog mushing races. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Iditarod race in Alaska.
Yeah, the sled races, yeah.
Yeah, so we have taken those races, the 4 biggest races in the world, combined them into a world championship that's called Krill Resource, after our brand. We own that world championship, and we're producing TV from those competitions that we're selling and distributing this year to 164 TV stations. So it was on BBC, NBC Sport in the US had it in prime time, our content that we're producing. So this is going to be our kind of X factor in our marketing mix to drive awareness of our brand, very similar like the way Red Bull is doing it in their marketing. And then there are things that, again, US mass market, $23 billion dog food market, and that premium part of that's growing kind of very healthy. And with that, we're going to move into the 6th investment highlight. That's actually our financials, and then Katrine is going to take you through that.
Yeah, thank you, Mats.
Thank you.
Okay, hi. So starting a bit with the aspiration, what is it that we're trying to build? And this is basically, we plan our business in 5-year cycles. So we're currently in a 5-year plan that ends in 2024. And the aspiration for the period is to end up at an EBITDA target of about $200 million. That is for the whole group, so the combination of the ingredient and the brand segment. We see today that we have north of 20% in EBITDA margin. That will grow over time in medium term to 30%, and also increase above that based on the scalability that Mats have already touched upon. we have invested quite heavily over the past few years into capacity and can now harvest on that cost structure and on that capacity structure when we now increase the volumes. What is important to mention is the upside on top of this figure and on top of the current business plan. And there are basically 3 key projects, and Mats have touched upon all of them, but just to make sure that I also mention them. The first one is Kori. So the launch of the Kori brand in US. We've made a commitment or an agreement with the retailers in US that for the first initial period, we will spend all free cash flow reinvesting into marketing to build the category and to build the brand. That means that we have not included any EBITDA contribution into the figures that you see here. So the 200 is without any EBITDA from Kori. The second is the pet brand that Mats also touched upon. That is still a fairly immature project in our organization. We are learning from the Kori launch and building that same brand or building that pet brand on the same platform. And as a result, have not included any revenue or any EBITDA contribution from that project. Also, the protein project is outside our current business plan. The launch plant will be ready in 2021, and there will be some commercial product coming out of that. But it is first in 2024, when we have kind of the full commercial plant with the 5,000 tons per year, we see the big volumes. And as a result of that, we have also excluded any revenue and EBITDA contribution from current business plan. That being said, we have included all the OPEX related to both the R&D development of the protein product and also the cost of running the project organization. On top of that,
So just on that, how much are you spending on R&D at the moment as a percentage of sales, and where does that go to over the next 3-4 years?
So our total R&D budget is around $8 million per year. Most of the science and research we do is OPEX related. But of course, once we kind of tap into larger projects, things are also activated on the balance sheet.
So will that drop as a percentage of sales over time, or do you intend to maintain it at, roughly speaking, the same percentage?
So the intention is to keep it. I mean, R&D is among the most important things that we do. So keeping a fairly, steady level on R&D as a percentage of revenue is the ambition we have.
Thank you. Yeah.
And not to mention the least, not at least, the pipeline, the R&D pipeline that we currently mature. So based on research, studies and documentation, new ideas and new projects will come through the R&D pipeline, and as they commercialize, will also be additional upside potential on the current business plan. Just to give you a bit of a backdrop on the key drivers, and this is a bit of a busy slide, so we'll take one row at a time. So at the very core of everything we do, and the big driver or our key driver is the capacity that we have, both offshore and onshore. And this is basically the offshore capacity, how we intend to increase that up until 2021. And then we show a fairly steady state of between 70 and 75,000 tons produced meal every year. That is a run rate where we are very comfortable and where we can kind of continue to optimize the underlying business and the sales, but don't see any additional need for capacity. You see that in 2019 we add Endurance, Antarctic Endurance to our portfolio, but it takes at least 1.5 years to kind of have that fully up to speed and fully commissioned into our operations. So we see that it will be end of the 2020 season or even early 2021 where we will have full utilization of the Endurance vessel. If we then go to the next row, which shows our 2 key product categories. The first one, Aqua, which is the big volume driver, where you see we sold almost everything we produced last year. That is a huge market, big volumes, and historically we have more or less sold everything we've produced into the aqua space. So the ambition or the strategic focus in this market is basically now to build that into a more premium segment where we can steadily increase the prices. So based on documentation, as Mats also mentioned, proving the positive effects of krill as an ingredient, building a solid and loyal customer portfolio across geographies will be key to grow this market. And as a rule of thumb, there is more or less a one-to-one relationship between the growth in the offshore production volume and the aqua growth. So you can assume that also in 2021, when we kind of reach a plateau on the offshore production, where we want to stabilize the production, that's also where we will reach a plateau on the aqua production, and then it's more about optimizing that market. The oil market.
Sorry, just so I can get in context. So, how much would this cost if I was a fish farmer per ton?
Well, what you basically do, you include between 3 and 5% of krill into your fish feed. And what you can actually do, you can actually remove other sources of feed. So you can, in reality, you can cut costs. So it doesn't necessarily need to be an increased cost. It basically replaces other key ingredients that, for example, fish meal and other things. I don't know if Mats wants to elaborate.
Yeah, I can just mention a few things. So basically, if you look at our shrimp market in Asia, the way it works is that there they take out a big chunk of expensive ingredients and replace it with a little bit of krill. So let's say typical they will take out 12% fish meal and then add 3 to 4% krill meal instead, and they will get the same performance. So as a result, their feed cost goes down. So that's how they do it in the Asian shrimp markets, where there's kind of more pressure on price. While in the salmon market now, with higher prices, they're more focused on just getting that growth. And then you will typically have an extra cost of the feed of about 50 cents. That's a kind of extra cost, you know, when also the feed producer had added their margin. And I think that's important to say. Krill is kind of one of those components the feed producers can use to get a little bit higher margin on their feed. And then you need to believe in about 1% additional growth of the biomass to get that kind of business case to be positive for the farmer.
So the route to market in Asia and in Europe, Norway, I should say, is principally through the feed producers, is it, or is it through the salmon farmers themselves?
Yeah, so we work very close with the feed producers here. Let's say take the salmon market first. We work very close together with feed producers. So very often we address the farmers together because we have so much kind of passion and knowledge about our product. And a lot of the Asian shrimp producers, they're vertically integrated. So it's the same company making the feed and making or having the farms.
Okay, so CP or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of our bigger customers.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, I interrupted you.
Yep. No, sure, no problem. The second key product line that we have is the oil market, where we sold almost 800 tons last year. And there's a bit of different characteristica in that market. That's where we already have a premium segment with fairly high, strong prices. And it's all about kind of growing the volume. So this we hope to see, or our ambition is to see also double-digit growth in this market. Basically now, as we have approved regulations or achieved regulatory approval for new markets, also in Asia, where we can expand. As US is our most important market today, we see Asia coming very quickly now as a second strong growth market. Then it's the brand segment, where we have Lang as a solid kind of base with their private label business growing at between 8 and 10% year on year. And then, of course, the launch of Epion this summer will drive that increase in the brand segment quite dramatically over the next 3 to 4 years. So we see that as a $100 million revenue market at the end of our current planning period. And it's important to note that those $100 million or that $100 million ambition is out of Epion. So that is the revenue potential we are seeking from Epion to the retail market in US. This Epion business will also have a strong kind of or positive impact both on Aker BioMarine, the ingredients company, as we sell the ingredient to Epion, and also Lang for kind of distributing and doing all the logistics related to the product. So where do we stand today? And this is the page that you saw earlier, and I'll give you some more details on the growth and also how we do this in Aker BioMarine. There is a bit of seasonality, both on the revenue side and on the EBITDA side. And looking first at the revenue, we basically have a very strong underlying growth in the ingredient sector. But in 2019, of course, Lang, as we acquired it in March 2019, also made up a big part of the growth from 18 to 19. The seasonality on revenue is mainly driven by the aqua demand, which picks up a bit as we go out through the year. It's a bit slow in Q1. And also on EBITDA, as you see, a fairly nice increase in the underlying EBITDA growth. This is adjusted EBITDA, so we've tried to kind of put back all the non-recurring items to reflect the underlying business. And just to comment a bit on your question earlier, in 2017, and that goes back to the accounting principles and how we do our books in Aker BioMarine. So all the production-related costs, both on offshore and onshore, is put directly into the balance sheet or to inventory at the time of occurrence. And then it's rolled out as a cost through the COGS when the products are sold. And that means that you will have a time lag of between 6 and 12 months from the cost has actually occurred to you will see it reflected in your P&L and with an EBITDA effect. And for example, on 2017, just as an example, we had a pretty bad 2016 production year in terms of onshore production and offshore production, and that translates into low gross margins the following year. And that is also why you will see, and Q1, the comparison in Q1 here is not the best quarter to actually visualize in Aker BioMarine. That is historically the weakest quarter that we have. And the reason just goes back to what I just said on the technical seasonality on EBITDA, because Q4 is usually the lowest producing quarter we have. All the vessels go into shipyard after the end of the season, which normally ends September, October, and they spend from 1 to 3 months at dock or in shipyard, depending on what kind of maintenance, repair, and modification work they need to undergo. So that means, but still with a fairly high fixed cost base, we still have the costs to absorb, and that means that you will have fairly expensive meal coming from the fourth quarter every year. And that, of course, will then reduce your gross margin at the beginning of the year. And then as the more cheap meal and the increased production, as it picks up in Q1, comes into the books, the EBITDA improves. So we usually have a low Q1, then a very nice second and third quarter, and then a more kind of stabilized fourth quarter. Just a quick comment also on gross margins, as I alluded to earlier. So we currently have a gross margin today of about 35% for the group and expect that to increase to about 45% within this planning period we are in. Mm-hmm. Just looking at the revenue and customer distribution. On the left-hand side, you see that in the ingredient segment, we basically have 90% secured with longer or shorter types of contracts. That give us fairly good visibility and predictability on the revenue streams. While in the brand segment, they don't operate.
Sorry, can you just go back on that?
Yeah.
I didn't fully understand. So customer contracts based on fixed prices and decoupled from the commodity market.
Yeah.
So have you got cost plus contracts? In other words, you've got an open book on how much it costs you to produce the krill?
So we usually have, we agree a fixed price, which then goes into the contract, and then it usually has an index regulation year on year if it's a longer than 1 year contract.
So which bits actually get
it's
varied?
Basically a negotiated price. I mean, the fish meal, of course, is still kind of a compare for some of our customers, but that is one thing we try to move away from, not being we do not see our product as a commodity product, and that is, the work we do with the customers to document the effects and kind of decoupling that link to the fish meal prices. But of course, historically, that has been a driver for some of these price negotiations, but we are now able to decouple it to a large extent, and it's basically individual negotiation with each customer. So there is a price variation between customers and between geographies, but on overall, and you will see that later, there is kind of an increase in that aqua price over the past few years, and that's also kind of the focus we have going forward.
So if I get this perfectly straight, so you're taking the risk on the production, the actual production cost in any given year.
Yes.
If you have a good season or you have a bad season, basically you take that on the chin.
We have no kind of price linked to operational risk items,
Right.
no.
Okay, thank you, yeah.
The brand segment, as you probably know, don't operate with such a contract structure. They basically have this planogram process that they do every year, which is highly performance-based, and basically your products will remain in the shelves if they have performed well. So that gives you about 12 months commitment on an annual basis. On the customer diversification, if you see the pie chart to the right, you see both the ingredient side and the brand side. And on the ingredient side, we've seen a very positive development over the past few years. We used to be very kind of dependent on a handful of large customers, but we have now managed to diversify the customer base, both across product types, but also across geographies, which gives us a kind of much more robust revenue distribution. On the brand side, this is basically the six biggest retail names in the US, and this is the customer portfolio of Lang, and will also be the customer portfolio of Epion.
Okay, and when Jürgen talked about the 100-odd competitors in krill oil, most of which you're supplying, that would come into other accounts, would it?
Sorry, say that again.
The other brands of krill oil, the competing brands of krill oil,
yeah,
which you said that Jürgen said you supplied,
yeah,
to those customers, those would come under other contracts, other accounts. Is that right? The 13% in the top left-hand corner.
Yeah, so that will actually be in the ingredient segment. So that's customers of Aker BioMarine. So we sell directly to US brands, but the brand segment, it's only Epion and Lang. So that doesn't include that sale.
Okay, right, thank you. Yeah.
Just going a bit more into detail on capacity, as this is, the very key driver of the growth, and just looking a bit back to see how we have built this capacity over time, both offshore and onshore. So this first shows the offshore picture. To the very left, you see the offshore production divided by vessel, and you see Endurance coming in 2019 with a small slice, as it had some, startup issues, and we had a fairly long or lengthy commissioning period to get it up and running. In 2020, we would have expected to have a larger volume in the first quarter compared to 19, but as I alluded to earlier, the shipyard can be quite comprehensive, and last year's shipyard was quite heavy, meaning that we actually went over time, and the vessels didn't get down to the fishing ground until late January. So we lost quite a few fishing days in the start of the season, which kind of took the first quarter volumes down. But you see at least that Endurance is now picking up, and it will be the most efficient harvesting vessel out of the three. In addition, it's also worth mentioning that there are inter-annual variances between the vessels depending on class and types of modifications and upgrades that they need to undergo. So if you see this time series, over several years, you would see that there are years where there are less or higher or lower efficiency or capacity on some of the specific vessels, but over time it has been a steadily increase in capacity. And we have invested quite heavily in upgrading both and improving technology and other kind of capacity measures to improve the capacity of also our two older vessels. In the middle, you see the same amount just divided by the offshore products that we make on board of the vessels. So you see the big volume driver, which is the aqua, the white area, and then you see the Nutramil, which is the ingredient that goes to Houston to produce the oil. And then the layer at the very top, the PET, which is our growth segment. If we then also have a quick look at the onshore production, all the way to the left in white, we did an investment and acquired 100% of the Houston facility in 2016 from a joint venture, and have since then invested quite significantly amount of money to raise or increase or build the capacity. So we currently have about 1,000 tons per year, and can easily add another 250 tons by means of a smaller, or by doing a smaller upgrade. In addition, we have also secured some third-party capacity to make sure we can serve the growing market and build a safety stock. This page basically goes back to what I started on when trying kind of to tell the bit of a different story and strategic focus on the two key product lines. So to the left, the aqua and pets, the strategic focus there is to constantly build the awareness and build the customer portfolio across geographies, and to document the effects and the benefits of krill as an ingredient, both in fish feed and pet feed, to be able to kind of grow the prices. And as you see, we have succeeded in growing the prices year on year over the last 3 years, and will continue to do that going forward. On the unit cost, we will expect to see that coming down. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that yet, and that has to do a lot with Endurance coming in 2019 with a full cost base and limited fishing or harvesting capacity. So now in 2020 and especially in 2021, we will see a fairly sharp decline in unit cost on the offshore production segment. On the other side, it's the oil segment, and a bit of a different story and focus there. That is already a high margin segment with good and stable prices, and that is indeed the strategy: keep prices stable and grow the volume. And by growing the volume with the facility that we have, with a fairly high share of fixed cost, we will have a nice reduction in unit cost, and we already see the results of the increase in capacity we've done, and we'll see that coming down even further going forward.
Given that's an intercompany transaction, how do you price it for Superbar?
So everything is priced on an arm length. On arm lengths. So we have more or less the same COGS and the same gross margins for all the sales that goes between Aker BioMarine, Lang and Epion.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Last page I wanted to take you through is just an overview of the key cost drivers. So to the very left, you see the key elements, our cost items. And if we just leave SG&A aside for a while, you see all the remaining element or items are what we call production-related costs. And that means that all these costs are put into the balance sheet at the time of occurrence and rolled out as part of the COGS when the product is sold. You see the offshore, which is the dark red, which is basically all the operations we have with the vessels. You see onshore being the orange, which is basically the Houston operation. And then the gray is fuel cost. Fuel cost is a part of our offshore production cost, but a significant cost driver. And we have, of course, benefited from a lower oil market sentiment, as we've seen lately. If we then
on oil, you've already moved to the new standard, is that right?
Yeah, so we were already IMO compliant, as you are not allowed to use sulfur above 0.5% in the Antarctic area where we are. Okay, thanks. So if we then address the SG&A category, which is much more than sales and admin in this sense, or in this setup, that basically includes everything that flows through the P&L. And meaning it includes the full R&D department, as we have already talked about, and it also includes our digitalization department. So basically everything not production related. And you see to the very right the split. And a key driver from the growth from 18 to 19 was that we hired more than 100 new people between 2018 and 2019. We also started up a handful of digitalization initiatives, including some of these big data projects that Mats have already mentioned. And we also had some non-recurring items like the Lang acquisition. So we see going forward, the SG&A cost level will stabilize or actually go down. So based back to your question earlier, the digitalization part and the innovation part are cost items where we aim to keep at a certain % of revenue, as these are key focus areas going forward, while the more administrative cost buckets are cost elements that we are constantly looking at and working to reduce. So a cost level going forward, which will be a bit lower than 2019, can be expected.